Yeah, sorry about that. That's actually today's big technical achievement. Right, so this is kind of a talk that I sort of wrote by accident. Phil asked me a little while back to talk about what I've learned about writing about some virtual reality and augmented reality from writing science fiction. I was like, well, that's an interesting question. And I went off and got a bit carried away and wrote what has turned into this. And it turned out what I kind of learned is that there's a lot more weirdness in sort of cyberpunk and science fiction and science than you'd think. So this is really a talk about that. But when I was thinking about it, I thought, okay, well, let's first of all start by thinking about, because I began by thinking about cyberpunk and going outwards, thinking, well, where do these words come from? You know, where do words like augmented reality, virtual reality, cyberpunk come from? Once we know that, once we understand their roots, we can begin thinking about what they are. And that led me down off places. So first of all, this is a guy called Tom Cordell. He coined the word augmented reality. I'm not going to talk too much about this, he's actually pretty dark. I'm sure he's a lovely chap. He's a Berlin researcher. He coined the word back in 1990 when he was building a digital display for aircraft electricians. This guy's Bruce Bethke. He is a writer from the 80s. He coined cyberpunk. And it's a bit more interesting. He coined it in a short story he wrote, you know, obviously a perfectly good cyberpunk short story, but for our purposes, not too much there. But then you go back to this guy. This guy's Norbert Wiener. And Norbert Wiener was the person who first started using the word cyber. He was someone who was fascinated by systems, how systems fed back to each other. And he wanted to find a word to describe that. He settled on cybernetics. And he got the word cybernetics either from an older French word, cybernetique, which means good governance, so good governance of systems, or from an ancient Greek term, Kubernetes, I think I'll pronounce that right, which means steersman, and it's from Kubernetes, steer. And that's interesting, because once you begin thinking about steersmen in Greek myths, you tap into all kinds of interesting things. You think about people steering kind of Odysseus across the sea, steering Jason and the Argonauts. You think about Charon, the ferryman of the dead, steering the dead souls across the river Lethe into their equivalent of heaven and hell. So you're already getting mythic resonances there. But what gets really interesting is virtual reality. So this is Jaron Lanier. He popularised virtual reality and the idea of virtual reality back in the 80s. But he wasn't the first person to use the term. The first person to use the term was Antonin Artaud. Antonin Artaud, famous French theatrical writer, brilliant genius, literally, sadly, a lunatic. I think he ended up in an asylum. And he described theatre as virtual reality in 1938 in a book called The Theatre and Its Double. And he said, when he was talking about theatre as virtual reality, he said, words say little to the mind, compared to space thundering with images crammed with sounds. And he talks at great length about the idea of theatre as a place that creates a virtual reality that has kind of an alchemical impact on you. First of all, alchemy is meant to be transformative. It's about turning lead into gold. And it's about doing it literally, but it's also about doing it metaphorically. The true alchemist works on himself as much as he works on the materials that surround him. And this is how Artaud understood theatre to be. He understood it to use a kind of, on the one hand, a kind of scientific process. We'll get some people on a stage, we'll shine lights on them, they'll perform, things will change in the audience. But on the other hand, drawing on a kind of thunderstorm of images, of sounds, of symbols, to create something profoundly transformative. And that was interesting because I was thinking about cyberpunk, I was thinking about virtual reality, and I was like, well, this is great because this kind of describes the kind of virtual realities that everyone here is trying to create. You know, it describes them as a space created through scientific means, but it describes them as a space that can be dense with kind of powerful, elusive symbols, that can be profoundly transformative, that can have a different impact on everyone that runs through them. And I was like, well, this is good. And I was kind of aware also that there's been a sort of long relationship between kind of more scientific heroes of fact and more kind of cosmic, transformative ways of understanding it. And it's kind of packed through the history of science. And this is a recent example of it. This is a guy called Jacques Vallée. Do you know him at all? Really interesting chap. On the one hand, he's kind of another systems theorist. He worked on ARPANET back in the 70s, kind of quite a famous IT person. He worked on original kind of mass conferencing protocols. He's theoretically one of the people that first helped invent the whole sort of IP address system. I've been told this by a friend, I haven't managed to double check it yet. So on the one hand, he's a very heavy-duty technician. On the other hand, he is a complete lunatic in the best possible sense. He was one of the early kind of French UFO researchers, and he came to believe that UFOs weren't in fact aliens visiting us from outer space, Aliens and UFOs, or what we experience as aliens and UFOs, are fundamentally the same things as gods, as fairies, all the kind of myths that have stepped out of mythland and walked up to us in history. And he sees UFOs as a modern kind of representation of them, filtered through our understanding of science. You know, we live in a scientific world, so weird shit that happens to us, we try and explain in a scientific way. So you have this kind of thing going on. On the one hand, he's a super rational person building the foundations of the internet. On the other hand, he's engaged in this really crazed, really kind of subjective stuff. He writes about it beautifully, it's worth reading him. The interesting thing about the IP address system is that theoretically it embodies both. On the one hand, it's how the internet maps where individual routers are. On the other hand, it actually came out, apparently, I've been told this by a friend who actually knew him. He was involved with CIA remote sensing experiences in the 60s, because they were doing this kind of wacky stuff back then. And he actually tried doing some remote sensing himself. And one of the problems he had while he was doing this was a kind of geographical one. You kind of close your eyes, you do what you're going to do, you envision the kind of Russian missile site that you're trying to look at. Oh my God, here I am, fantastic, now I know Russian secrets. I will go back and report on this. You go back, then you can't find the Russian missile site again, because you know it's out there somewhere in this kind of vague, fuzzy, unconscious otherworld. So I began thinking, how do I create a geography within an entirely subjective space? When I'm doing remote sensing and other people are doing it, how do we create shared geography somehow? And he came up with a system that was kind of sort of numeric, was coded, and became the foundation that inspired the creation of a kind of IP address system. Because that too is about creating kind of specific geographical sites within a completely subjective space. So, right there, when the internet is being planned, when the web is being planned, you have this kind of collision between nutty mysticism. And it's only nutty because I don't believe in it. If I believed in it, I'd say, no, this is the truth, So I'm being rude when I shouldn't be. And an attempt to kind of create something completely rational in the world. Any sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from science. This is something that has run through the history of science. This is obviously tweaking the Arthur C. Clarke way. Yeah. This, Isaac Newton, obviously brilliant scientist, founding father of modern science. He actually saw himself as an alchemist. Science was a bit on the side for him. So in a very real sense, we live in a fully magical age now, and the science we have now is the magic that people like him did, that just happened to work and be reproducible by other people. Going further back, this is John Dee. John Dee wasn't a scientist in the same way. Do you guys know him? He was basically a major Elizabethan magus. He was the model for Prospero in The Tempest. He had the best library in England back in the 1600s, very sadly broken up after his death. He travelled to Prague, he tried to raise the dead with his associate Edward Kelly. He was an early pioneer of wife swapping for psychic reasons. So it could be argued that he also pioneered the idea of the slightly dodgy cult, although he didn't do very well out of it. He's also the person who kind of first theorised the idea of British Empire. He was a close advisor to Elizabeth I, partially as a kind of astrologer occultist, partially as a thinker about nationhood and about where we should be going. So he first theorised the idea of British Empire, and he's known as the founding father of the British Navy. He was the person who looked at the world, and on the one hand, the stars are doing this, I talked to some angels, which he did, he kind of transcribed Enochian angel language, which is still in use to talk to angels even now. You can regard it as a programming language for eternity. He transcribed all that stuff. He was also saying, look, let's look at how the world works in real terms as well. Let's try and do something constructive with it. So this sense that magic and the occult exists to give you agency in a profoundly subjective world. But that's kind of what science does as well. And it's kind of what a lot of the sort of technological work that we do does as well. It gives us agency in a sort of strange and unpredictable world. And he's one of the founding fathers of that. So this all came from thinking, okay, where do these words come from? And I was like, okay, this is very interesting. Where else can we go with that? Raising the dead. So this is Dee's associate, Edward Kelly. He's one of the famous dodgy people in occultism. And they're talking to a dead person in a churchyard in Barnes. I actually should try and track down that church and kind of restage that picture. But what's interesting is that on the one hand, they're doing something profoundly mystical. They're raising the dead, this fallen has been called from a grave, and they're asking questions about the truth of the universe. Another way of understanding this is they're using the best available technology of the day, and they would have understood this as technology, to try and pierce the mysteries of the universe and impose some order on it. So there's something scientific going on here as well as something mystical. And if you read Renaissance magic tracts, they're fascinating because a lot of the rhetoric it's partially, okay, here's something completely crazy, you know. If you want to send a message to someone in another city, write it on a mirror, hold the mirror up to a full moon, and give the person another mirror with these occult symbols inscribed on it, and they can hold it up to the moon at the same time, because you've arranged this. They will be able to read on their mirror the message you've written on your mirror. It's texting. It's also completely crazy. But what's interesting is the language that surrounds it is almost without exception, and I have tried this under these circumstances, and this helped it work, and this stopped it from working. So there's something very kind of scientific going on there as well. And there's something scientific happening here. There's also something about virtual reality. They've summoned a discarnate intelligence to tell them truthful things, and this got me excited. Behold, the holodeck. You all know the holodeck from Star Trek, yeah. And while I was rooting around for pictures, this was another thing that set me off. I was like, how fascinating. Because what you've got here is the holodeck. Real human being, discarnate intelligence knows truths. This is actually Professor Moriarty. Real human being is kind of interrogating them. What's fascinating about this is the visual language of these two pictures is identical. So, person there holding up hands, discoursing, person there inquiring, blah, blah, blah. It's just reverse. And I wasn't quite sure what to make of that, beyond the sense that when technological things happen, spiritual and occult things are probably also happening as well. Or there are links between spiritual and occult things and technological things. What's interesting here is the reverse, of course, because the person with power is the technological entity. And that says something about the way we understand technology as well. It's something mysterious and more powerful than us. We have to be careful how we control it and how we deal with it. Fairly consistently in Star Trek, the holodeck goes horribly wrong and chaos ensues because it is more powerful than us. But then again, look how careful these guys are being. They can't step outside the circle, otherwise the ghost will eat them. So, there too, there's a sense we're dealing with unpredictably powerful, scary things. So I thought, okay, this is kind of interesting. Where do we go from here? And then I began to think, well, the way Star Trek uses holodeck is fascinating because they are consistently doing that thing of raising the dead. When they raise Moriarty, they raise someone fictional. But more often, there's Isaac Newton, there's Alfred Einstein, there's Stephen Hawking in his wheelchair. So virtuality in Star Trek, and very often in science fiction as well, is performing a fully occult function. It's bringing the dead back to life and letting us speak to them. We have become mediums enabled by technology, which is kind of a Ouija board for us to speak to the universe. So I was like, oh, that's kind of good. And here too, CSI is a fascinating program. CSI is actually fully science fiction. It's about what would happen to a present-day investigative police force if they have access to the astonishing technology that they have in CSI that we don't have in the real world. And what happens very often in CSI, again, they do that thing of speaking with the dead. CSI technology in the program brings the dead back to life and lets us interrogate them to find out exactly what happens at a crime. So there too, there's something kind of uncanny and something slightly spooky there. And then you get people like Nigel Neal. Nigel Neal is a great god of British science fiction writing. He wrote major television drama in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And this is from a program of his called The Stone Tape. And The Stone Tape is fascinating. First of all, it's utterly terrifying. I would totally recommend watching it. Secondly, it's about a bunch of scientists, and they're cutting-edge scientists. They're part of a research team for a private company trying to find interesting new breakthroughs. And they go to isolate themselves in an old house in the country. And the old house in the country happens to be tremendously heavily haunted. It's a seriously spooky place. And this staircase is the locus of the haunting. And scary things happen there. And what you see here is one of the characters who looks like a ghost herself, she's living, is looking at the staircase and contemplating it. But what's really interesting is the explanation that Nigel Neal gives for what's going on here. He says, okay, what we have here, he understands ghosts to be kind of entities that are somehow recorded on time, recorded on a specific place and step out of time because of that. And they're triggered under certain circumstances. The science team become very excited by this. They think, my God, we have stone tape here. We have a new recording medium. We have a way of recording the world as it is in great detail and then playing back at any time. So the action of the drama happens when they start trying to work out how to do this because they think, brilliant, we'll invent a new technology. This is the breakthrough we've been looking for. And they do. And it being a supernatural horror story, horrible things happen. But what's really interesting there is the two things going on at once. First of all, you have someone saying, okay, ghosts are real, spooky, uncanny things happen, and they're triggered in ways that we don't know and can't understand, even with science. And ultimately, they fail to understand what's going on. You also have fundamentally the invention of solid-state memory, of kind of electrical impulses recorded on silicon and played back to us to create the same thing again and again in a TV horror show in the 70s. And then I thought, well, this is brilliant, this is a fascinating parallel. And it really shows, as humans moving through the world, we do so in kind of rational ways, trying to make sense of it in scientific ways, but we're also fully emotional, fully superstitious creatures. And so we drop our own emotional, our own sort of very subjective interpretations of the world on top of it. Come from emotions, from religion, from metaphysics, from wherever. And you've got the two things happening together in this program. So this is interesting stuff. And of course, you have gods. What we've talked about so far are kind of hauntings and spooky things and sort of humans being in control. We've touched on the idea that things we create can be more powerful than us. This is a great obsession of science fiction, the idea that we will create something bigger and stronger than us that will squash us like flies. It's happening in the real world. Arguably, the technology as a whole has led to global warming, which is going to squash us like flies. We've created a kind of stuff that's going to break us. And this is something science fiction is fascinated by and has really interesting metaphors for. So this is a bit of Tron, which I'm sure you guys all know. Utterly fantastic film. And what's really interesting is this is a god and this is his messenger, but it's also an operating system and one of the entities that kind of helps the operating system control the computer it's in. So you've got this very precise mapping going on of an entirely theological moment onto an entirely technological one. And that's something, science fiction, there are a lot of gods in science fiction. This is the sign of Ertzuli in voodoo. So you know how voodoo works. You basically create signs like this, and again, they're kind of like a programming language for the gods. You use them to summon gods, you use them to relate to and engage with the gods. So this kind of symbol is a way of writing directly to divinity. And science fiction has picked up on the metaphor that implies. William Gibson in particular, there's a fantastic bit at the end of Neuromancer when voodoo gods start manifesting themselves in virtual reality. And when I read that, back in the 80s, that was kind of a transformative moment. It's like, oh my God, all this stuff can come together at once. All this stuff can coalesce. But also it was a way of thinking, this is really interesting, because the language we have developed over millennia for living in kind of pantheistic societies, for engaging with entities that are abstract and powerful, but only in certain ways, and limited in very other ways, and often behave very irrationally. The way that we relate to the divine is an interesting way of relating to technology too. And I think we kind of do that already in a very subconscious way. Making it conscious helps us work with it rather than having it kind of control us. And this is another Nigel Neal drama. This is from Quatermass and Pitt. And it turns out that the gods aren't technology. The gods, or the devils, are Martians. The whole drama hinges on the idea that life on Earth, or intelligent human life on Earth, was seeded by Martians 4 or 5 million years ago. The Martians are recovered, and the Martian spaceship itself starts reprogramming local humans to kind of work as Martians. So there's this kind of idea in science fiction, that the divine is present. If it's not divine, it's demonic, but it can control us, it can rewrite us, and it can get us to do whatever we want. So I thought, brilliant. And then I moved on to this. I was like, okay, well let's bring it back to the present day. This represents a book by Neil Stevenson called The Diamond Age. And it's kind of a transcendental book. It's about this girl here who gets reprogrammed by this book here. And she becomes a sort of transcendent human being. Because we've talked about other things, other spooky things coming up through science fiction, coming up through science. We've talked about the gods of science. What about us? How does it make us better? And this is something that has kind of fascinated science fiction. It's very present in technology as well. Here's another great example, and I'm sure we all remember that great 80s film, The Lawnmower Man. And it's one of the great virtual reality epics. The big thing that came out amongst various of my friends who were into that sort of thing was to go and drop loads of acid and watch it. Because then they believed the virtual reality bits. And for a lot of people I knew back then, it was our first real experience of what virtual reality was and how it could kind of overwhelm us. And it's about this simple fellow here who turns into a god by the end of the movie. He gets to transcend the flesh through the power of virtual reality. And there was something happening around the time, in the 90s. All of this kind of crazy stuff was being very consciously drawn on. And I can only apologise for the next image. The Shaman. Possibly the greatest band of the 90s with their giant dancing, what's that guy's name? That actor who's in The Driver and things like that. He's a sort of action hero guy. Anyway, Jason Statham. So the Shaman thought when you achieve transcendence, you will be surrounded by mushrooms and you get giant dancing Jason Stathams. And this video actually peaks with about 12 giant dancing Jason Stathams on screen. It's utterly terrifying. But it's also very interesting because what they were drawing on was a very particular strand of cyberculture that was prevalent back then, but had its roots back in the 60s. On the one hand, they were very, very engaged with technology. If you went and saw them live back then, technologically it was wonderful. You know, they had little microphones strapped around here instead of big ones that you held like that everyone else had. They had astonishing light shows. The music was kind of immensely driven by the sort of musical technology of the day. But they also had full-on cyber mysticism going on. And they were coming out of Terence McKenna, who was very broadly speaking a kind of, I think he was fundamentally an ethnologist. And he believed if you took enough magic mushrooms, you would speak to discarnate intelligences from other dimensions that would reveal the true secrets of the universe to you. And he felt that human evolution began when primates started eating mushrooms and met these entities and blah, blah, blah. And the Shaman drew both on that absolute madness, and I shouldn't be rude about it, on that particular understanding of the world. And they also drew very deeply on the kind of technological sense at the time. Their great catchphrase was kind of a techno-tribal positive survival, shamanic and archaical artistical revival. And what they were pushing for was on the one hand something that looked right back to a kind of imaginary tribal past, but on the other hand a way of bringing people together that was fully mediated by the technology of the time. So the internet would release us from the bonds of the physical and help us transcend our immediate limitations and form new groups based on people who truly loved each other and everything would be wonderful, as opposed to being driven entirely by pornography, racism and madness. But yes, they were wrong about that. Thank you. But maybe that's what the giant dancing Jason Statham's represent, a shadow with that. And that comes out of this guy. That comes out of Doug Engelbart. And I love this picture. Statement one, word, word, word. In the beginning was the word. Doug Engelbart was a major 60s technologist working in San Francisco. And this is him doing something called the Mother of All Demos. And when he did the Mother of All Demos, he basically, I think it was in about 1968, he unveiled the whole of what we have now. The mouse, sort of people conferencing on screen, things like Skype, absolutely everything you can imagine, graphic user interfaces, everything you can imagine powering a modern computer system was unveiled by Doug Engelbart in the late 60s. It was then heavily ripped off by Xerox PARC, who took much of the credit for it, but it came from him and his research group. And his research group were fascinating. They were very plugged into the sort of psychedelic culture of the time. So for example, the demo was filmed by Stuart Brand. Stuart Brand was also involved with the Grateful Dead, would go on to found the Whole Earth catalogue, would become deeply involved with The Well and John Perry Barlow and that crew. All his researchers were kind of going to the original acid tests, were kind of parting with the Grateful Dead before they were even the Grateful Dead, dropping acid, all that kind of thing. And that kind of utopian sense that if we have the right kinds of information technology, we can become new kinds of human, suffused everything he did, was part of the reason for his failure, because it's too utopian. So right from the word go, right from the beginning of personal computing, even before you get to virtuality, there's been this kind of cosmic utopian strain running through it. And it's dropped into science fiction. Oh, I missed someone else. And it's dropped, this sense of transcendence is really big in science fiction. So you have Pat Cunningham, she's known as the queen of cyberpunk, she's kind of the female William Gibson. And she wrote this fantastic book called Sinners, in which a man steps into the internet and basically becomes his own ghost. And she follows very precisely the process of transcendence that he goes through. Obviously, the idea of the internet is something that you can step into and it can become a spiritual realm where your true soul becomes free, blah, 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 has been present in science fiction for a while, but she really brought it into focus in the early 90s. And the whole mirror shades thing in Cyberpunk as well. It's like mirror, shade. Where have I heard this before? This is a still from a film called Orphée, which is about the Orpheus myth, kind of, reworked as a very sort of philosophical French classic from, what was it, the 50s? And what's fascinating about it is that mirror shades are the great sign of cyberpunk. We all had mirror shades in the 90s, we all look really cool. Orfeo, the film, deals with the idea of shades, with the idea as it understands the dead in a very kind of classical Greek way. You die, but your soul remains somehow incarnate. It steps across into this place where you sort of forget the past, blah, blah, blah. And the way you get into this place is through a mirror. So this is one of the best special effects shots in cinema. The character just before has said, I'm going to walk through this mirror, this is Orpheus, I'm going to walk through the mirror and I'm going to find my dead girlfriend, I'm going to bring her back. And he's pulled on his gloves and he stepped up to the mirror and pushed his hands into it. And the way John Cocteau did this was to have a vat of mercury. So as he cuts, you move from Orfeo standing in front of the mirror to him pushing his fingers into a vat of mercury, which of course looks like a mirror. And the mirror shudders and ripples, goes out, and then he walks through it. It's one of the greatest single special effects shots in cinema. It's also a mirror and someone going through it to get shades. So I was like, okay, this is totally coincidental, but mirror, shades, it was there in Orfeo, it's there in Cyberpunk. How fantastic. Orfeo is clearly a Cyberpunk movie. Anyway, that's a bit of a side issue. Which one of these guys would you say is noted science fiction author of the 60s and 70s, James Tiptree Jr.? Which one? The bearded one or the not bearded one?
The not bearded.
Absolutely, yeah, you saw through like coming before. So what was fascinating there, James Tiptree Jr. is her, and she's a fascinating, first of all, she is a writer of brilliance. She's one of the founding mothers of Cyberpunk. She was a big part of the kind of feminist new wave in the sort of late 60s, 70s. She wrote really spiky, disturbing stories. But she never revealed herself. She'd led this extraordinary life. She'd been a spy. Her parents had taken her off on adventures in Africa when she was young. She'd done incredible things. And for whatever reason, she just didn't want to reveal herself to the science fiction community. So she wrote as James Tiptree Jr., only communicated with people by letters. And there was about 5 or 10 years of very heavy-duty speculation in the SF world. Is she actually a man? Who is this mysterious person? Oh, she's definitely a man. She has to be a man because science fiction is so masculine. And when she revealed herself, it was this very famous moment because all these people were like, no woman could ever write science fiction as good as this. Well, we weren't completely destroyed, which is rather lovely. Sadly, once she'd revealed herself, she never quite wrote anything as good again. So the persona of Tip she created, James Tiptree Jr., and through which she corresponded with people, she was very close to people like Ursula K. Le Guin, but entirely through letters, never through the real world. Once she lost that persona, she seemed to lose a big part of her creative self. What's interesting also, it's another sort of cyberpunk sort of thing, another science fictional thing, because she was using the technology available to her at the time. It's not as developed as ours. She couldn't go on Second Life and pretend to be a man or something like that. The technology she had was the typewriter and the letter, and she was using that to build a persona for herself that was completely separate from who she was. So there's an interesting kind of moment of transcendence going on there. And there's a lot of transcendence in her fiction too. There's a particular story called The Girl Who Was Plugged In, which is very much about that, which is about transcending a certain kind of, femininity is the wrong word, it's about different ways that femininity and humanity is a kind of mask, and different ways of exploring those masks. So, so I was like, okay, I think that counts as a moment of cyberpunk transcendence. Philip K. Dick, of course, you have to mention him in any sort of talk like this. He's the ultimate crossing point for the cosmically mystical and the very heavily science fictional. I won't talk about him too much because I'm sure you all know him very well, but basically he is a full-blown, heavy-duty, high-functioning Gnostic. He understood himself to live both in the present and in ancient Roman times, where he was a Gnostic heretic of sorts. His writing is much of his writing is as much religious metaphor as it is high-functioning science fiction. And he's possibly the single most influential writer in modern science fiction in terms of how his stuff has kind of pervaded the mainstream and pervaded people's sense of what science fiction is and can be. So that's fascinating. It seems like the way to be successful in science fiction is not to major on the pure science. It's to go, no, this stuff is metaphor as much as reality. It's subjective as much as it is objective. And it's there to help explore the religious and the mystical and the occult as it is to think, okay, what would it be like if we had anti-gravity? What would teleportation do to housing prices and estate agents? That's not really what that stuff is for. Nothing is true and everything is permitted. Yeah, and fundamentally, this is really what science fiction is there to help you explore. It's there to help you create symbols, to understand the world in a way that's kind of very religious and very occulty as much as it is scientific. So yes, there's that. But I've just lost myself in my notes slightly. And with it, there's a warning as well. Do not call up. Oh, actually, one question. Who do you think I'm quoting here? I'm genuinely curious about this.
Cowling.
Pardon me?
Less
No, I wish I was. No, the reason I asked that question is that this quote has recently been popularised as part of that, the Templar Assassin game where you play a kind of crusader, what's it called? Assassin's Creed, yeah. So this quote has been popularised as part of that. And wherever I've seen it's been used recently, it's been in that kind of context. It actually comes from Hassan Sabah, who ran the Assassins, the original, the Hashishim, kind of whacked out Islamic assassin cult way back when. And that was how he understood the world to work. And he created kind of virtual reality of his own. The way he would brainwash people is he would get them incredibly stoned, which that on its own would work on me. I'd be like, yeah, what do you mean stoned? Just get them even more stoned when I come back. He would get them incredibly stoned, they would pass out. He would carry them through to a specially created garden, which is full of beautiful women and fruiting fruit trees and all kinds of loveliness. And it was in the middle of the desert, but it was very carefully watered, so it was very green and lush. It kind of felt impossible. The person who was brainwashing would then wake up and go, oh my God, where is this awesome place? And Hassan Sabah would be like, well, it is heaven, and I have the keys to heaven, and you may come back here if you do these nefarious things for me. The person blitzed out of their skull would then have an astonishing time frolicking in this wonderful place in whatever way they choose. They would at some point be drugged, would pass out again, go back in thrill, and go from there. And that's kind of a virtual reality forerunner. That's this idea of here is another world that can rewrite the way you understand the world, and we'll drop you back into the real world, and you'll do what we want. Kind of like, I don't know, Twitter these days when you get zapped by a Russian botnet or something. And this is a warning, do not call up that which you cannot put down. That comes from H.P. Lovecraft, and he's talking about elder gods and things from beyond space and time that want to eat your soul. But equally it does apply to technology, and it's something that I think to myself all the time, don't summon things into your life you don't necessarily have control over. But every single thing we do, even the most rational things, engage with the objective part of us as much as they do the subjective part of us. And we have no real control over the objective part of us. And so, on the one hand, this is good advice, but it's advice that you kind of have to ignore if you want to move on and be creative, because you've got to take that risk, The whole point of this stuff is engaging with stuff that you don't fully understand to see what happens. And that leads on to this. This is me. And this is my quote that I'm trying to popularise. Science is the magic of the objective. Magic is the science of the subjective. So science exists to take the objective and do astonishing, impossible, wonderful things with it. The promise of magic fulfilled through science. Magic is the science of the subjective. Magic is looking at all the subjective experiences we individually have and trying to work out if there's some sort of coherence behind them and there's some sort of way that we can create reproducible results from them. And I think part of the reason I wanted to give this talk was to kind of test it out and see what happened when I actually did it. And one of the things that's happened is my sense that, this is what science fiction is doing. It's kind of being magic with science. It's taking real things and it's doing crazy, nutty stuff with them just to see what happens. It's testing objective knowledge through the lens of the subjective to see what happens. So yes, that's it. And I hoped it would be kind of a rich and interesting thing to talk about as well. So the final question is, having talked about objective and subjective stuff, we must return to the fully subjective. And without calling up things that we cannot put down, like political arguments where everyone ends up yelling at each other or something like that. What do you think? Did that trigger kind of interest? Any questions, any thoughts, and so on? Thank you.
My brain is just like...
Yeah, that's meant to be slightly overwhelming. The thing is, it's such a huge subject. There's so much stuff there, and there's so many different ways of approaching it. And this just came out of me. I was kind of sat there going, oh my God, if you think this, then that, then that. And so I think there's something very deep there. And I think because we understand science and scientific things to be so rational, you can go in without your more emotional, your more objective self. And that just means that stuff gets repressed and then explodes at some point. And this is part of the explosion.
I'm reading this book, The Temple Paradox is my favourite mind management book at the moment.
Okay.
But it's all about managing your emotional self and not kind of understanding it's your chimp. and concentrating on your human self. So it's kind of like, that's quite interesting. But you can never get rid of your chimp. You can exercise your chimp or talk to your chimp and never really get rid of it. But yeah, it's a kind of parallel to
Absolutely.
But I think we should perhaps be more emotional. We're not being emotional enough, so I'm going to get my chimp out a bit more. Go with it.
Yeah. Also, if you press the chimp will explode, and no one wants to exploding chimps.
Well, no, you have to walk in the park, or eat. It depends what context. But I think maybe a lot of science and ideas, and business, it's all kind of quite corporately pressed, and we're not being creative enough.
Yeah. It's interesting, there's an occultist around at the moment, this guy called Gordon White, that's written basically a guide to how to do corporate chaos magic and how to use chaos magic to control your career. And it's really interesting because it reads both as a practical magical primer. The first time I read it, I was like, this is like reading this stuff, So how interesting a primer in practical chaos magic that happens to happen in a business environment. And then I read it again, I was like, oh my god, this is not magic, this is a series of metaphors to help you, just to give you a different perspective on how you're working in the corporate world. And I think it's both at the same time, and I think that's what a lot of this stuff is. The chimp is both entirely true, because we do have a chimp inside us, but it's also a very useful metaphor, it's a useful way of thinking about yourself.
So you were talking a lot about people during the 1950s or whatever that were sort of infusing the occult into their technology. Do you know much about people doing that today?
I wish I knew. I know, I won't name him because I don't know how much he likes some of these stories told, but one of the big movers in the current smart contracts world is a high-functioning Hindu mystic who spent most of the 90s literally kicking the shit out of voodoo practitioners because he disagreed with how they went about things. So, it's definitely out there. And I think that world is the worlds collide very easily because both understand the world around you to be something that you can rewrite in ways that are beneficial to you, but they can also be very risky if you get it wrong. So they understand everything that surrounds you to be kind of full of hackable meaning. A lot of magic is about hacking, just as the same a lot of technological development is. They're definitely out there. They tend to pop up after the fact because people get a bit embarrassed about this, so they don't talk about it at the time. But then one of the great examples is Jack Parsons. He was a rocket scientist in the 50s. Actually blew himself up, poor bloke. He was doing an experiment in his garage and he blew himself up. On the one hand, he was a very, very high-functioning rocket scientist in sort of, was it Los Alamos? One of the big secret places. On the other hand, he was an associate of Aleister Crowley's, who with his wife and L. Ron Hubbard tried to create the Moonchild in accordance with Crowleyan magic, and failed because L. Ron Hubbard ran off with his wife and founded Scientology. That would stop anyone who does that. And so, so he was both these things at once. He was a scientist and he was a high-functioning occultist. I think a lot of that scientific impulse, if only I understood the world, I could do something interesting with it, can very easily drive you down the occult path as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you didn't mention
Fast. Well, it's kind of, yeah, I think, it's a really dumb, but you're absolutely right. That's the great founding myth of science. The sort of, you have to do with the deal with the devil to get the scientific knowledge. And you're absolutely right. Part of the reason I didn't mention it is because Crashing Heaven is based on it, my book. And I didn't want this to be, oh, behold my ego. But it is fundamentally that. When you let the science in, you let other stuff in as well. And it's also, there's a point there that when you're doing contemporary science, you can never tell which bits of it are actual science and which bits are just superstition. Because stuff that people believed in back in the sort of 19th century, the early 20th century, you'd look at, no, it's complete nonsense, totally rubbish. How could they believe this? It's no more than superstition. And yet it was understood to be science at the time it happened.
Bureau for Unnecessary Research.
Oh, no, I haven't. This is really cool.
Well, so if we know what we're doing, it wouldn't be research.
Yeah. Well, that too, they do not call up. Actually, you want to call up things you cannot put down, or at least take that risk, because you don't know what's going to happen.
So, what is this sort of like? Yeah, what is this chaos magic?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. There are my understanding is relatively limited. There are kind of two major strands of magic in the 20th century, and that's magic with a K on the end to distinguish it from conjuring magic. One strand of them comes out of Aleister Crowley, out of the work he did, and that stuff is very kind of high, very ritualised, very theatrical. You have to know an awful lot and sort of join secret organisations and move up through grades. You can kind of do it yourself, but if you're going to do it properly, you've got to join one of these organisations and become a magical initiate. And he sort of founded that field of it, and sort of codified a lot of stuff and made it happen. The other half of 20th century magic comes out of this guy called Austin Osman Spare, and he was fantastic. He was a very great artist. He spent most of the latter part of his life sitting in pubs in South London, scribbling things on the back of a beer mat to make it rain outside in return for a pint. He was a very powerful magician. He was kind of very down to earth, and he invented signal magic, which became one of the bases of chaos magic. And the insight that drove signal magic was like, okay, magic is something that happens because your subconscious wills it, and somehow your subconscious can engage with the world around you in mystical ways that are not open to a conscious mind. So the big challenge you have if you want to do effective magic is to give an order to your subconscious in some way, or let it know what you want to happen in some focused way, and then get out of its way, because your conscious mind will actually stop this from happening. So he invented sigil magic to achieve this. And when you kind of create a sigil, what you do is you write the sentence, make it rain. Then you strip lots of letters out of it, so you end up with MKTRN. And then you turn them into a kind of, essentially a logo. You mix them all together into one graphic shape. You play with that until it becomes pleasing to you. And then you just leave it lying around the place, and every so often you glance to it. For him, he could theoretically work straight away. And that sense that magic wasn't something that had to be very heavily ritualised, but was something was just a way of writing commands to your subconscious using the imagery around you, became chaos magic. Because what chaos magic says is, no, you don't need all the ritual. The important thing is that you believe in it in some deep and committed way. It doesn't matter what imagery you can use. So there are chaos magicians working with the Walt Disney Pantheon, kind of doing magic with Mickey Mouse and Minnie and Pluto and stuff like that. You can do magic with the Muppets. You can treat these things as gods and make requests, or as powerful spiritual forces, and make requests to them, and they will answer you, because it's not them answering you, it's your subconscious going out to the world. And it became very trendy in the 90s, and the shaman were tapped into all that stuff. It's kind of the various kind of occult groups that were making music around this. It was a very trendy thing because it mapped very precisely onto that excitement that here's this whole new IT world, that you just need to write a command to and the world changes. So it was a very natural fit with kind of wacky cyber stuff, and it sort of fed into that whole world. Also, it doesn't need too much effort to make you feel like you're really good at it, which if you're doing shed loads of drugs and sort of going to underground raves and stuff, so you don't want to be doing a sort of 6-month fast to summon your guardian angel just so you can say hello to them, and 2 years down the line they might do something for you. You want something that gives you immediate results and that works on the rapidly changing culture around you, and that's very much what chaos magic is. There's a great, on Gordon White podcast, if you want to follow it up, there's a recent podcast where he talks to an IT project manager who's also a functional magician. She's an example of the kind of person you're asking about, and she's talking about sort of agile as a magical system. So we're saying, well, when you're doing an agile development, what you're doing is you're exerting your will on the world in a spontaneous yet coordinated way to achieve results that, on the one hand, are specific, but on the other hand, change as you go along. This is a magical act. This is a magical act of will as much as it is a kind of real sort of development act of will, blah, blah, blah. So, the correspondences kind of run quite deep if you get into them. But you can create correspondences between any system of metaphors if you want to. So.
It's more of a request than a question, but would you be able to compile like a kind of a basic kind of fundamental reading list out of this talk? Because you've touched upon so many books that I haven't read, and I would love to have like a beginner's guide to
a bibliography of weird SF.
Yeah, it's like it's like scribbling down notes, and it'd be great to have like a list of and any podcasts or any other kind of media that you throw in.
Yeah, kind of strange and interesting stuff. No, absolutely, I'll do that. Yeah, I mean, it's circular sense.
Yeah. You could share your notes.
There are these that I scribble all over, and then there are the slides. So No, I'll do a bibliography, and I think that'll be better.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I'd love to read my way through it. It'll need probably about 10 years.
It's such fascinating stuff. Once you begin moving through this kind of field, you sort of see correspondences everywhere. And it reflects back, when I'm writing fiction, it reflects back on it. So how do I create things that are happening in the real world that are also sets of metaphors that help you explore other things, But I don't know how that would map onto how you guys work with technology and engage with this stuff yourselves.
So we were talking earlier about the fundamental physics group at Berkeley University in the late 60s, who were a bunch of physicists who took lots of drugs, that seems to be a common theme here, but also got into Eastern mysticism and developed breakthroughs in quantum mechanics and quantum computing that we still use today. So because of that, they went in a completely different direction to mainstream physics. And I was just wondering, one of the things we were talking about was the context of the institution there and how that played in. That's something that you didn't really mention in this. I think, do you think you can institutionalise this stuff or structure this stuff, or is it just random?
I don't think. The problem is that when people go too far into the occult, that literally or metaphorically they tend to get burned. And that was a problem the fundamental physics group had. I've just passed the stage of the book where someone had to leave the building to talk about the metaphysical meaning of what they were doing, because they probably would have got sacked if anyone had thought they were taking treating objective physics in this subjective way. So I think it's something that it's so odd. People tend to be a bit suspicious of it. The institutions that do institutionalise it have the problem that it's all fully subjective, so it's very hard to institutionalise. And they're also very easily tip over and become cults. Apparently one of the big problems for practicing occultists within these networks is, am I being manipulated? Am I actually in a cult? Am I giving to this more than I'm getting out of it? One of the things that struck me, and it's a wordplay thing, is a lot of the great occultists are deeply untrustworthy people. Aleister Crowley was a complete shit. Austin Osman Spare was bowel cancer, lovely chap, but he was more trustworthy than Crowley. He seemed to be a decent man.
It's not saying that.
This is true. Yeah.
But do you think people are going into this because they want to manipulate the world, because they can see big powers at play than their own? Then it kind of goes with the territory.
Yes, but the real purpose of this, and it's fascinating because one of the consistent themes is all this stuff is incredible, but it's not the real end point of it. Learning the nature of reality lets you manipulate the nature of reality in ways that are personally beneficial to you, but karmically speaking, or whatever the local metaphor is, this is a very bad thing to do. Because you understand that it can be manipulated to understand that it's all very it's not really there, and therefore you step past it. And you get that, the place...
Well, that's the noble version.
No, but that's the formal advice, that you will get lost in it. If you start pushing it and using it too heavily, you will get lost in it. And I think also part of the point of these guys being crooks, I had this moment I was playing with language, I was like, okay, crooks are crooks, Crowley was a crook. What does a shepherd use to guide his sheep? A shepherd uses a crook. So I was like, okay, well this is interesting. If these people are sent by occult other powers to guide us, and they're all crooks, how can that be a good thing? Well, it's really good because it teaches you not to trust them too much. Because if you trust someone fully, it's like, I have great power over you, you join a cult. Whereas if you're constantly questioning, constantly saying, well, half the time they're full of shit, half the time they're talking sense, I need to be absolutely sure which one it is, then you're thrown back on your own judgment constantly. So I think part of the point of all these guys being crooks and being so dodgy is to constantly throw you back on your own judgment. So you're not taking things on trust, and you become much more difficult to manipulate. So I think there's something kind of rich and interesting there. If I ever form a cult, I will do my best to be both trustworthy and untrustworthy. So you get both the mystic wisdom and the gold Rolls Royce outside.
The thing I thought, in a way, the question I suppose, is the opposite of Phil's. It's like it feels as if this has been stripped out, and that we're in a very price-orientated world at the moment. It's full of measuring things, and that seems to be exactly the opposite of looking for deeper meaning. Actually, it's not that we should be. It's not so much what happens when you put more of this in, but what happens when you take too much of it out. You do the science without the philosophy, you lose track of. Yeah, or you just have the objective without any sense of the wonder of things.
that's very much the deeper meaning of the fundamental physics, and I'm just a third way through it, you know, but the deep theme of it is, if you do physics without the sense of wonder and the sense of awe of the universe and responding to the deeper questions it raises about humanity, then you're not really doing physics at all, you're just doing equations. And that makes me think of, you know, the William Blake quote, you know, my business is not to reason and compare, my business is to create. He loathed Newton with a passion because he felt that he was a kind of reductive presence. He was just reducing everything to measurable things, whereas the truly valuable things in human life weren't measurable. And you're absolutely right, we live in a culture that values measurement above all else. And all of this stuff, to an extent, you know, it's the meaning. It's, well, what does this mean for me personally? You know, that's why magic is so subjective. Because part of the questions it asks is not just how do I manipulate the cosmos, but how do I understand the cosmos? And how can I get my meaning out of it? Magic is opposed to religion for me, because religion tends to be organised structure and impose meaning on it, impose group meanings, whereas magic is a much more personal thing. But there's a very blurred line between the two. You know, kind of magical cult can become a religion. Wicca has kind of become a religion, for example.
Well, religion was the science of all times as well. There's no separation between religion and science at some point.
You know, it all kind of blurs, you know. Although religion has a moral force that science doesn't. To the scientist, a certain kind of scientist would say, I am not concerned with the morals of what I do, I just want to understand how things work. Whereas religion is like, well, I want to understand how things work, but there's moral judgments that come with that. So in that sense, religion is more sophisticated.
And indeed, it was also to say ours is not the reason why.
Yeah, don't think, have faith, And faith is something that makes it, you know, faith is really interesting. So on the one hand, faith is a buffer. Faith protects you. I mean, talking to friends who've had heavy-duty mystic experiences, faith is very useful because it lets you doubt things. And if you've seen something that breaks your entire world model, to have a bit of faith, you know, well, I kind of believe this happened, but I'm not quite sure, so I'm just going to process it for a bit, is kind of a useful thing. But it's a great way of manipulating people as well. You know, you have to believe impossible things to follow me. Now you have to believe that giving me all your money will actually be good for you. You know, so it's a weird thing.
So unless anyone's got any final questions, maybe we'll wrap it up now. Is that all right? Because I know some people have to kind of...
One final point. One of my favourite things about sci-fi is its ability to be quite prophetic, and there's a kind of modern example like Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror seems like that kind of scary kind of overlap of what's happening now, what maybe kind of bad things to come. As a sci-fi writer yourself, do you have any predictions about where we're going in terms of technology?
So the only prediction I've made is that I would be wrong about it. I mean, I think the real purpose of science fiction is not to predict, but to help you practice being surprised. And I think if it was possible to predict, it would get a bit boring, because then there'd only be one particular kind of science fiction written. It would become a realism of the future. Whereas what I love is the nutty aspect of it. If I had to, I mean, I tend to be a pessimist because but then everything's cyclical, so the two predictions is everything's going to get really bad, and then beyond that, it'll probably get a bit better because it tends to. So. But how that works, I'm not quite sure.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much.